through Oakley Greenwood's work, you've been engaged on a number of projects, and part of that has been looking at the economics. I'll ask you a very high-level question, and it might not have a simple answer. In that work, do you think you're seeing hydrogen becoming, or is it economically viable into the future?
So that's a really interesting question, Ron, because there's two parts to that. One is the cost to produce the hydrogen. The second is what are the various markets and how much are they willing to pay? So one of the things that's been missing even in this conference has been a really detailed analysis of the willingness to pay by various sectors in the market. So hydrogen at the moment is probably reasonably able to compete within the liquid fuels displacement market. Some technology issues in there we have to deal with, but the problem for hydrogen is it needs very, very, very cheap renewable electricity. So there are only two forms of energy in Australia that are renewable, that at scale. One is renewable electricity, the other is biogas. We don't have a lot of hydro, run-of-river hydro that hasn't already been tapped. We certainly don't have a lot of, hot underground rocks and things like that. So you really look at that and you go, you have to have very cheap renewable electricity to produce hydrogen or to produce synthetic methane, and you can't get around that. Right? So you can have the most efficient conversion process you could possibly even think of, but in the end you've got to have cheap renewables. And that drives, so gas becomes a carrier for renewable electricity. We can take hydrogen and turn it into liquid fuels if we want to. And when you start to price that up, it's a better market to think about the liquid fuels market. Displacing natural gas, we're probably 15, 20 years away from even being near it. Right? It's just too expensive. And frankly, it's a journey. So take the early markets in the early years. And the other part of the market, which I think is really interesting, is that we're seeing governments here and internationally prepared to fund the development processes to get those prices down, much as they did for solar PV, really. When I started in solar PV, it was $9,000 a kilowatt. By the time I finished the modelling, it was $3,000 a kilowatt. Those curves came in quick because we had really good subsidy schemes. So I think hydrogen is going to benefit at scale, probably not so much in the small areas, but at scale, through subsidies federally and subsidies from Korea and Japan and Europe and places like that. I think you'll see 10, 15, 20 years of that. And if you don't get that, I think it's going to be very difficult for that industry to bring those costs down naturally. So you've got the subsidised parts of the market, but you've got other parts of the market that are really very high cost. Liquid fuels are not cheap, as you know, $100, $120 a barrel. What's the long-term price of oil going to be? To my mind, that's where hydrogen domestically should first focus. Get that market down as fast as it can, and that will help with bringing some of the costs down. And I think the other thing that people forget with this energy costing problem, one of the things that drives your cost is what's your social licence. Right? So one of the problems for coal companies, they have no social licence left, so it's not worth pursuing it. Right? For the gas industry, they're going through a transition where they're stuttering with their social licence, so it's costing more to do stuff, to do development work. There seems to be a view that is now changing rapidly that the renewable energy industry, and particularly the hydrogen industry, has got a social licence. But we're finding out that that's not necessarily true either, because the size of these plants are huge. The 1 gigawatt plant, Edify in Queensland, for the hydrogen production will be 300 acres. And that's 18 petajoules. That's next to nothing in gas terms. But it's this scale that's going to cause the problem. It's the power line problem coming in and out of Victoria. So I think there's going to be, you've got to allow time for that stuff to flow through. You don't get frustrated with it. The social licence will come, but it's not going to be immediate. It's like every industry has to build its social licence, and there's a cost to that. And that's where governments can play a really good role, a really top-class role in trying to get that social licence to operate properly. The not in my backyard syndrome will apply to renewable energy as much as it applies to gas or coal. And that's in my mind, these things take time. So the transition, I keep saying transition to net zero. It's not net zero tomorrow. It's a transitional framework out to 2050, and that's what we've been working on. Forget about the fight about it. It's done. We've turned that corner. It's all about how do you now get there? What's the best way to get our emissions down? I mean, frankly, the best way to get our emissions down right now is get rid of coal. Get coal out of the system. Just they're not making any money. They don't want to be there. They want to shut them down. Help them. And then in that period, go through getting the cost of the alternatives down, getting the technology, getting the skills up. Skills are going to be difficult as well. I think it's a more complex issue than just a cost of production. It's not a technical calculation. It's about how do I get a project going. I'm an engineer. I can tell you that some projects, people come to me and they go, well, I want to expand. In fact, I'm working with one now. If they electrified the mining sector that I'm looking at, we go from 200 megawatts to 900 megawatts. These new 275 kV power lines, 10 years. You won't get those built within 10 years. Simple as that. And that's a cost. And that's millions of dollars to do that. Before you put anything on the ground, your build-up costs are going to be enormous. The government can short-circuit that. They could take that 10-year process and turn it into a 3-year process.